So hi Duncan, thanks so much for joining us. So for those watching, we have Duncan Lustig-Prean joining us, and he is director of the Ledwood Centre. And obviously a lot of other things, which I'm sure everybody will be very excited to hear about. So to kick us off, I know that you've had an extensive and colourful career. Can you tell us and everyone else watching a bit about your background and also how you began with Royal Navy and the Merchant Marines?
Well, my background is perhaps a little unusual because there are not many naval officers who started their lives as opera singers, but that's exactly what happened with me. I went to music college, graduated, but while at music college, I fell in love with the Royal Navy. And so I joined first as an ordinary sailor, worked my way up through the ranks, and ended up as a senior officer serving in destroyers and frigates in the early 90s. So between 79 and the mid-90s, I was Royal Navy. And then, because the law in those days was unkind to LGBT people, when it was discovered that I was gay, I was discharged. Many people in those days could go to prison just for being gay, but the majority, fortunately, I suppose, rather avoided prison and were simply discharged.
And what did you move on to next? I know that you've had a lot of different facets to your career. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I was very lucky. I moved straight into work, having left the Navy, first of all for the organisation Liberty, so working in human rights as deputy director. I then moved to the largest firm of human rights solicitors who also deal with a lot of miscarriage of justice cases as their CEO in London, and then to the Advertising Standards Authority as deputy director. But I found the civilian world quite difficult to adapt to, having been a military person. And I think that that is something which all people from my background would say that they experienced too, not least because having been discharged so suddenly, I didn't benefit from the resettlement courses. There was still the emotion and the difficulty of getting over what had happened. And of course, at the same time as I was doing my professional work, I was also working with rank outsiders and indeed leading them for a while, campaigning for change and being one of the test cases to change the law.
Can you tell us a bit more about that work there, about the test cases you mentioned?
Well, for me, I was a very closeted gay man. I'd grown up on the Isle of Wight, which is still a very conservative place. If you want to go back to the 1950s, visit the Isle of Wight, it's lovely. But in attitude, then, it was difficult. And so I was very private, and I would have gone privately. But rank outsiders assisted me during the advice stage while I was being dismissed. And because I had been working at a senior level in the military and had access to quite a few information and knowledge of the systems, I was able to advise them and their clients who were in the same position as I had been. And on one occasion, having been given rather a difficult case, the police called me and asked me to go to Plymouth in the middle of the night, where a young sailor who was 18 years old had just finished his military police interrogations. They were very hostile interviews that would occur if there was a suspicion of homosexuality. And he was on the Tamar Bridge in the pouring rain in the middle of the night, threatening to jump. And over the course of a few hours, I was able to talk him down. And it was at that stage in late 1994 that I realized that, frankly, if I was worth the commander's rank, then I had to stand up for young men and women like him and say this is wrong. And I had to use my rank to go public and to take a stand. And that's how it started.
Wow, okay. And obviously, you know, we're talking about pride for this issue. I guess drawing on your experiences so far, what was your experience or understanding of pride growing up and throughout your professional life?
Well, for me, anything gay was, of course, an embarrassment, be that a camp television presenter or something gay like Pride coming up on television. I used to feel very naked and exposed. And I'm sure there are people right now who feel exactly the same in front of their parents, families or friends or work colleagues when that happens. But I was aware of Pride, and my first Pride was in 1994. Being military, would you believe, we were spat at by members of the gay community, because I think there was a misunderstanding in those days about what the military were, in just the same way as the police had gone through similar hostility years earlier. And so we had to change hearts and minds in our own LGBTQ communities as much as we had to change public hearts and minds.
Wow, okay. And what does, I guess, sort of linked to that question, what does pride mean to you then? And has that changed over your career, would you say?
I think more than ever, particularly as we see homophobic and transphobic violence and attack increasing over recent years, pride is as important as it ever was. We still do not live in an equal society. There are still people who experience discrimination and injustice, both within our communities, but especially those who belong to other minority communities within the communities. All about intersectionality here as well. And it is really important just to have that one day, that one weekend, where you can walk freely and be who you are and feel safe. And many people in our country don't have that. And many, many more people throughout the world don't have it at all.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned about your experience in the Royal Navy and how that led you to working with rank outsiders. Can you tell us a bit more about that period of your professional career and anything else you'd like to sort of tell us in more detail about that?
Within the Navy?
Yeah, and also your work with rank outsiders. Yeah, that'd be great.
So, well, the Navy, I thought I was aware of the rules. In my day in the services, when I started, women did not serve in the front line. So it seemed to me that the rule that I assumed applied, which was you don't have sex on board ship, you don't have sex in the military workplace, seemed entirely sensible. Workplace relationships are very often quite disruptive and difficult. So to put them in the metal monastery of a ship makes it even more acute. So it seemed to me that there were sensible regulations. And in fact, I was never asked about my sexuality. My first ship as a trained officer, I opened up a letter addressed to my commanding officer, which was a report by the Special Investigation Branch of the Military Police about one of our sailors who had confessed to being gay. He never had sex, actually, but he'd confessed to being gay. And that report was utterly shocking because I realized I was in exactly the same position as him. This policy wasn't about inappropriate sexual activity in the workplace. This was all about a state of mind. And if your state of mind was lesbian or gay, you would be dismissed after the most horrendous and intrusive investigation. Rank outsiders, well, of course, we had to firstly campaign to change hearts and minds in the public. You're not going to change the law without bringing the public with you. We also had to work politically in government and present evidence to the Defence Sex Select Committee, present evidence to our MPs and ministers. We had to persuade existing ministers who were hostile that whatever the policy that they wanted to keep was, it needed to be used with mercy and with decency, and that the nature of the interrogations and investigations and the sort of searches, the intimate body searches and the medical examinations was something that had to go. That was in the regulations in 94, 95. And so we were able to at least have people in our position dealt with in a little bit better way. And of course, we had the legal action as well. And we knew that when we took the government to court, and there were 4 of us who were the lead test cases, we knew we would lose in the United Kingdom and that we would need to take the case to Europe. So the Human Rights Court would have that final decision.
Can you tell us a bit more about those test cases and the how you were, how did you go about campaigning for change in that time?
Well, in terms of the test cases, I was not involved in the selection of those who were ultimately chosen. We needed to make sure that we had people, we had both male, female. We wanted to have representatives of the officer corps, the NCO corps, and ordinary soldiers and sailors as well, so that there were no get-out clauses that could be used by the Ministry of Defence. We also needed people who were not just had clean records, but who were exceptional in their ability. That was important because we didn't want what you often see happen at industrial tribunals is, well, there's no smoke without fire, you know, they weren't perfect. There needed to be a very clear, these were very good people who were dismissed for one reason only, so there were no get-outs for the ministry. So having found the cases, we went to the High Court. The High Court were incredibly sympathetic. Indeed, they said the tide of history was against the Ministry of Defence. They found the nature of the investigations that were pursued against us were completely extraordinary and disgusted the judges. And then we moved to the Court of Appeal, which was similarly very sympathetic, but frankly, the law was not on our side. The Human Rights Act did not exist in those days in the UK. And so the judges said, very sadly, you're going to have to endure the delay and the expense of going to the European Court of Human Rights. There, the Ministry of Defence defended vociferously their case, but it was clear that the judges who were looking at other European countries and other nations around the world who had changed the law many years before were very sympathetic to us. And so a few months later, our judgment came through. And then a couple of months after that, the law changed, not just in this country, but of course, being a human rights judgment, it set the standard across the world and ultimately included the United States.
And is that change in the law, the lifting of the ban on homosexuality in the armed forces, or was that another? I know you've been involved in a number of different legislative changes. Which one was that you were referring to there?
This was the armed forces, but the importance of the armed forces judgment was that it was the first time for the LGBTQ community that an employment judgment had said you cannot discriminate in employment, any employment, not just the armed forces, because of someone's sexuality.
Right.
So it was actually very important.
Wow, gosh, what an amazing part of history to have played such an instrumental part of.
Yeah, it was fun, and I very privileged to have been able to do that. Of course, it wasn't the end of the matter, as you said, because bits of legislation still sit in our statute. And it was only a few years ago in 2017 that a friend of mine pointed out that the Criminal Justice Act had some legislation pertaining to homosexuality in the armed forces. So we were able to persuade Parliament to change that law, having given evidence to the Select Committee once more, and having persuaded the service chiefs that they would not oppose such change. And actually that was historic because it's the first time Parliament, both houses, had voted on a piece of LGBTQ legislation and unanimously agreed it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was an achievement. We also discovered that there were some laws which related to the merchant navy, which were anti-gay. I was able to get assurances, and the next year that was repealed. And I've been working on other matters relating to not just my own community, but I think it's important that if you are in a minority community yourself, you stand as an ally for other communities as well. So I've been working in other areas too.
Lovely. And I know that currently you're director of the Ledwood Centre. Could you tell us a bit more about the work that you do there with your team at the centre?
Well, we're brand new. We're going to be the first LGBTQ centre in the southeast of England. We're about to take over a very large premises where we will have a cinema, meeting rooms, consultation and treatment rooms, a cafe which is going to employ a number of people from the LGBTQ community, including those with learning disabilities. It is all about intersectionality and intergenerationality. We have a dressing room, for example, for members of the trans community, so they can come and change and learn about makeup. But it's all about learning from each other and sharing together. And it will all be done on a pay what you feel you can afford model. So at the cafe, if you can't afford to pay, you don't pay. And that will be done discreetly with no contact with a volunteer or staff, so you don't have to beg for anything. And it will be a place of culture and the arts of the community.
Wow, that's wonderful. That really is wonderful. What would you say are the main areas that you support as part of the centre?
Um, it covers so many. The arts are an important part of what we do. We have a tie-up with the socially engaged art salon, who have numerous artists from the Black, Brown and Asian communities. We are going to be fully accessible and have done extensive consultation both with those with neurodivergence and other disabilities, so that we are accessible for all. We really want to be a place where you feel safe and welcome, and you learn from other people around you. For example, our young chefs, the trainees, we have a domestic kitchen as well, because many groups, for example, if you're in a Muslim group, if you're Asian, you have your meetings around a meal, not in a pub, not around a bar, but you have a meal at home and you invite people to that meeting. So we're building a large domestic kitchen and dining room to enable that. And that means I can bring my young chefs down. Not only will they learn about another culture's cuisine, but they can talk to the people who make up that culture and learn about it. And that to me is what we're all about as a centre, learning from each other.
That's wonderful. Gosh, and when are you due to set up? You said you're due to take over.
We're going to be in weeks.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to come down to Brighton and have a look very soon.
You're very welcome. As would all your readers be, because we are open to the public and there is something for people to see and do every day.
Lovely. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we'll make sure we link to any websites or any publications or anything you'd like about that, so that people can get a bit more information if they'd like it. I guess sort of to draw to a close, if you had one piece of advice to give to young LGBTQ plus people serving in the armed forces now, what would it be?
There is a lot of support out to you. The campus group in the armed forces, Fighting with Pride, a charity working outside the armed forces. There are a lot of people in there. You are not alone. The armed forces have changed. They have been incredibly apologetic about the past. They are determined from top downwards to get it right for the future and be an inclusive organisation. Coming out to your colleagues is always difficult. Don't be afraid of it. Don't feel under pressure to do it, but take your time and use a trusted friend first would be my advice in the forces. You'll probably have a couple of colleagues you know really, really well and trust. Use them. You'd be surprised. Like me, they'll probably say, "Do you know, old thing, we knew all along you were gay."
That's a lovely piece of advice. Thank you. I guess just as a very last question, if we come back to the theme of our issue and pride, maybe we could reflect. Do you have any reflections on pride, and perhaps thinking more about this year in particular and everything that's been going on with COVID and any struggles that people have had this year? Do you have any last sort of reflections on the role of pride here?
Yeah, we're seeing the very fact that pride hasn't occurred in many places, won't occur in many places because of COVID, is devastating for two reasons. Firstly, financially, for many places, Brighton especially, the Brighton LGBTQ charities and groups rely heavily on income from our pride. And they've lost, for 2 years now, £250,000 of money from pride to support their activities. So please, please, even though we're all fed up with Zoom and online events, please do try and support your pride events, because you'd be surprised how much other local areas rely upon the income generated. And secondly, many people, all of us, suffer from this sort of deficit of human contact, of being able to socialize, of being able to be ourselves. There are many people through whom pride is an absolute godsend, because it means they can get out of perhaps a homophobic household and just for one day be themselves. And that absence of being able to be yourself and have that mad weekend for a year is really being deeply felt. It will come back, but do support your online events, however sick you are of them.
Yes, What a lovely note to end on. Well, it's been so interesting talking to you, Duncan. I could talk to you all day about all these amazing things you've been involved with, and we look forward to seeing what the Ledwood Centre gets up to in the next month as it comes into fruition. And yeah, and we'll obviously link to everything you've been doing and are doing so that people can get involved.
Thanks so much, Gemma.
Lovely. Thank you, Duncan.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.